My name is Eileen, and I've been married to Ryan for 12 years. We have 2 children, and what most people would describe as a stable, predictable life. From the outside, it looked like everything was perfect. House, careers, family dinners. But beneath the surface, cracks had started to form. Our marriage had grown distant over the years. Ryan worked long hours at his demanding job, and when he was home, he was often exhausted. We barely spoke, let alone connected emotionally or physically. I felt invisible, like I was just another part of the house he came home to, not the woman he had fallen in love with. That's when Jared came into the picture. Jared was a colleague at my part-time consulting job. He was charismatic, funny, and attentive in ways I hadn't experienced in years. It started innocently enough. Chats during coffee breaks, shared laughter over silly office jokes. But those interactions soon became something more. Jared would compliment my outfits, tell me how lucky Ryan was, and listen to me vent about my frustrations at home. At first, I told myself it was harmless. Jared was just a friend, someone who made me feel seen and appreciated. But the lines blurred quickly. The conversations moved from work to personal life, from friendly to flirtatious. I started looking forward to seeing him, texting him late at night, and eventually, I made the choice to cross a line I could never uncross. The affair was intoxicating. Jared made me feel alive, desired, and important, feelings I hadn't felt in years. But deep down, I knew what I was doing was wrong. I avoided thinking about the consequences, convincing myself that I could keep my 2 lives separate. That illusion came crashing down one Friday evening. Ryan and I were having one of our usual quiet dinners after the kids had gone to bed. The silence between us was heavy, broken only by the clinking of utensils. My phone buzzed on the counter, and I glanced at the screen. It was a message from Jared. Before I could grab the phone, Ryan reached for it. "Who's texting you at this hour?" he asked casually, scrolling down the message. I froze, my heart racing as I watched his expression change. The casual curiosity disappeared, replaced by confusion and then anger. "Who the hell is Jared?" he demanded, his voice rising. "Ryan, it's not what you think," I started, but he cut me off. "Not what I think?" he snapped, holding up the phone. "So he just calls you babe and tells you he can't wait to see you tomorrow for fun? Explain that, Eileen." I felt a wave of panic and shame wash over me. "It's complicated," I said weakly. "I didn't mean for it to—" Before I could finish, Ryan's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and his face turned pale. "It's him," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Jared's message was short and mocking. "Hey, loser. Your wife is mine now. Get over it." Ryan stood up abruptly, his chair screeching against the floor. His face was a mixture of fury and disbelief. "Is this what it's come to, Eileen?" he yelled, his voice breaking. "I work my ass off to provide for this family, and you're sneaking around with him?" Tears streamed down my face as I tried to reach for him, but he stepped back. "Don't," he said, his voice cold. "Sorry. Don't touch me." He grabbed his coat and stormed out of the house, leaving me standing alone in the kitchen, my heart pounding and my mind reeling. I had made a choice, a selfish, destructive choice, and now the fragile illusion of control I had built around it was shattered. I didn't know where Ryan had gone, but I knew that when he came back, the life we had built together might never be the same. Ryan didn't come home that night. He didn't call, didn't text, and when I woke up the next morning, his side of the bed was still untouched. The emptiness felt suffocating, but I told myself he just needed space. That illusion was shattered when he walked through the door later that afternoon. His face was pale, his eyes bloodshot, and there was a tension in his movements that made me feel like I was standing on thin ice. He didn't say a word to me as he walked past, heading straight for the bedroom. I followed him, my heart racing. "Ryan, please," I began, standing in the doorway as he threw clothes into a duffel bag. "Can we talk about this?" "Talk?" he snapped, his voice sharp as he turned to face me. "What's there to talk about, Eileen? You've been lying to me for God knows how long, sneaking around with Jared, And now he's sending me messages like that. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? Tears welled up in my eyes, but I fought to stay calm. I never wanted it to get this far, I said quietly. I didn't mean to hurt you. He laughed bitterly, shaking his head. Didn't mean to hurt me? Eileen, you've ripped my heart out. Do you even understand what you've done? You've made me look like a fool in my own marriage. His words cut deep, but I knew he was right. I had betrayed him in the worst way possible, and now the weight of my actions was crashing down on both of us. I know I've made a terrible mistake, I said, my voice trembling. But please, Ryan, don't throw everything away. We can fix this. Fix this? He repeated, his voice rising. How do you expect me to fix this, Eileen? You've been with another man, my wife, and you think an apology is enough? He zipped the duffel bag shut and slung it over his shoulder, brushing past me as he walked out of the bedroom. Ryan, please, I begged, following him into the hallway. Where are you going? I don't know, he said, his voice cold. But I can't stay here. Not right now. He left without another word, the sound of the front door slamming echoing through the house. I stood there for a long time, the silence around me feeling heavier than anything I'd ever experienced. The days that followed were a blur of tension and uncertainty. Ryan moved into a friend's guest room, avoiding my calls and only returning home briefly to see the kids. When he did, he barely spoke to me, his presence a constant reminder of the pain I had caused. Jared, meanwhile, kept texting me. His messages ranged from flirty to possessive, and every time my phone buzzed, I felt a wave of guilt and anger. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. I had wanted excitement, attention, an escape from the monotony of my marriage, but not this chaos. One evening, I finally broke down and called Jared, my voice trembling with frustration. What the hell were you thinking sending that message to Ryan? I demanded. I was thinking it's time he knows the truth, Jared replied nonchalantly. Why are you still holding on to him, Eileen? You know you're happier with me. I don't know what I am anymore, I admitted, tears streaming down my face. But this isn't helping. You're making everything worse. Worse? Jared scoffed. Eileen, I've been nothing but honest with you. He's the one who didn't appreciate you. I'm just showing you what you deserve. His words, which once would have made me feel desired, now felt hollow and manipulative. For the first time, I began to question everything about my relationship with Jared, whether it had ever been about love, or if it had just been a way to fill a void I hadn't known how to confront. Ryan, meanwhile, was unraveling in his own way. He threw himself into work, spending long hours at the office to avoid facing what had happened. Mutual friends told me he had started drinking more, his usually composed demeanor cracking under the weight of his anger and humiliation. When we did speak, the conversations were strained and brief. I'm here for the kids, he would say coldly whenever I tried to talk about us. Anything else is irrelevant. His distance was like a knife to my chest, but I couldn't blame him. I had done this. I had betrayed the man who had stood by me for over a decade, and now I was watching him fall apart because of it. As the days turned into weeks, I began to feel the full weight of my actions. Jared's charm had faded, replaced by a selfishness that I couldn't unsee. And Ryan's absence had left a void in my life that I couldn't fill. I had wanted something more attention, more passion, more excitement. But now all I felt was regret. I had torn apart my marriage, and I wasn't sure if there was anything left to save. It was nearly a month before Ryan agreed to sit down and talk. The weeks leading up to it had been a painful limbo. He came home only to see the kids, keeping our interactions limited to clipped, practical exchanges. But when I finally asked him for a real conversation, for a chance to explain, to apologize, he reluctantly agreed. We met at the dining table, the same place where so many family meals and everyday conversations had taken place. But this time, the air was heavy, and the warmth that once filled the room was nowhere to be found. Ryan sat across from me, his arms crossed, his expression guarded. Say what you need to say, he began, his voice flat. I took a deep breath, trying to steady the trembling in my hands. Ryan, I started softly. I know I've hurt you more than I can ever make up for. I betrayed your trust and I hate myself for it. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. Truly sorry. He let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. Sorry, he repeated. You think sorry fixes this? Eileen, you didn't just hurt me, you destroyed us. You destroyed me. And for what? For Jared? Tears welled up in my eyes and I nodded. I know. I let myself get caught up in something I shouldn't have. It wasn't about him, Ryan. It was about me. I was lonely, and I was looking for something, anything, to make me feel alive again. You didn't think to talk to me? He snapped, his voice rising. You didn't think to tell me you were struggling? Instead, you went behind my back and found someone else to confide in? To sleep with? His words hit like a punch to the gut, but I forced myself to keep going. You're right, I admitted, my voice trembling. I should have come to you. I should have told you how I was feeling instead of looking for an escape. I know I've broken your trust, and I don't deserve another chance, but I'm asking for one anyway. Ryan leaned forward, his eyes blazing with anger and pain. Do you have any idea what it felt like to read that message from him? To see another man calling me a loser and claiming my wife as his? Do you know how humiliating that was, Eileen? To think that I wasn't enough for you? Tears spilled down my cheeks as I reached out for his hand, but he pulled away. You are enough, Ryan, I said desperately. You've always been enough. I lost sight of that. I let my own insecurities and selfishness blind me, and I made the worst mistake of my life. He stared at me for a long moment, his jaw tight. Do you even love him? He asked quietly. No, I said firmly. I never loved him. I thought I did, but it wasn't real. He was just an escape from everything I didn't want to face. I love you, Ryan. I've always loved you. He leaned back in his chair, letting out a deep sigh. Love isn't enough, Eileen, he said bitterly. Not anymore. You can't just say you love me and expect that to undo what you've done. I don't expect it to, I said quickly. I know I have to earn back your trust, and I'll do whatever it takes. Therapy, counseling, anything. I just need to know if there's still a chance for us. Ryan was silent for what felt like an eternity, his gaze fixed on the table. Finally he spoke, his voice low and strained. I don't know, he admitted. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. And without trust, what do we have? His words felt like a knife in my chest, but I nodded, wiping away my tears. I understand, I said softly. And I don't blame you for feeling that way. But if there's even the smallest part of you that's willing to try, I'll do everything I can to fix this. He looked up at me then, his expression filled with a mix of anger, sadness, and uncertainty. You need to give me time, he said finally. Time to figure out if I even want to try. I'll wait, I said immediately. As long as it takes, Ryan, I'll wait for you. He stood up slowly, his movements deliberate, as though the weight of the conversation had drained him. We'll see, he said quietly before walking out of the room. As I sat there alone, I realized that the road ahead would be long and uncertain. Ryan hadn't given up completely, but he wasn't ready to forgive me either. And as much as I wanted to fix things, I knew it would take more than words to rebuild the life I had shattered. The days after our confrontation felt like living in the aftermath of a storm. Ryan didn't come home that night, choosing instead to stay at his friend's place again. He had said he needed time, and I knew I had to respect that. But the silence, the space he had carved between us was unbearable. I threw myself into taking care of the kids and keeping the house running, but everything felt hollow without him there. Every time I walked past the empty side of the bed or saw his shoes by the door, I was reminded of what I had done. of how deeply I had hurt him. Ryan began to rebuild his life, but he did so without me. Through mutual friends and the snippets of conversation we had when he came to see the kids, I learned that he had started going to therapy and had joined a gym. He was finding ways to heal, to focus on himself. He looked healthier, stronger. Even his demeanor was different, more confident and self-assured. When he came to pick up the kids one evening, I couldn't help but notice the change. His posture was straighter, his voice steadier. It was clear that he was working on himself, and while part of me was proud of him, another part felt like I was being left behind. Meanwhile, I was grappling with my own guilt. At first, I tried to rationalize what had happened, telling myself that I had been pushed to my breaking point, that Ryan's emotional distance had driven me to seek comfort elsewhere. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that those were just excuses. The truth was, I had made a selfish, destructive choice, and now I had to live with the consequences. I started going to therapy myself, desperate to understand why I had let things spiral so far out of control. In those sessions, I began to confront some hard truths about myself, that I had been looking for validation, for a way to escape my feelings of inadequacy, and I had used Jared as a temporary fix for deeper problems I hadn't wanted to face. Jared, for his part, didn't make things any easier. He continued to text me, alternating between sweet-talking me and pressuring me to leave Ryan for good. But the more I heard from him, the more I saw him for who he really was: manipulative, self-centered, and nothing like the person I thought he had been. One evening, I finally blocked his number. It was a small step, but it felt significant, a way of closing a door I should have never opened in the first place. Despite all of this, the weight of what I had done continued to haunt me. I couldn't look at my kids without wondering how my actions would affect them, how the cracks in my marriage might ripple through their lives. Every time they asked when Daddy was coming home, I felt a pang of guilt and sadness that I couldn't put into words. For Ryan, the distance seemed to be what he needed. He was thriving in a way I hadn't seen in years, and while I wanted to be happy for him, it was hard not to feel like I was watching him slip further and further away. Months passed, and while Ryan and I maintained a cordial relationship for the sake of the kids, the emotional gap between us remained. I longed for the chance to rebuild what we had lost, but I knew that decision wasn't mine to make. It was up to him now, and I had no choice but to wait and hope. In the quiet moments, when the kids were asleep and the house was still, I would sit alone with my thoughts, replaying everything that had happened. I had wanted excitement, attention, something to break the monotony of our life together. But in chasing those fleeting moments, I had torn apart the foundation of what we had built. Ryan's absence left a void that nothing else could fill. He wasn't just my husband, he had been my partner, my anchor, the person I had built a life with. And now, because of my choices, that life was hanging by a thread. I didn't know what the future held for us. Maybe Ryan would find it in himself to forgive me, to give us another chance. Or maybe he would decide that he was better off without me. Whatever the outcome, I knew one thing for certain. The person I had been, the person who made those choices, couldn't come back. If there was any hope for us, I would have to become someone better, not just for Ryan, but for myself. For now, all I could do was wait, unsure if the damage I had done was something we could ever truly recover from. It was a quiet spring afternoon when Ryan and I finally sat down to talk about our future. Months had passed since the night everything fell apart, and in that time, we had existed in a fragile limbo. He had come and gone to see the kids, always polite but distant. I had watched him from the sidelines, trying to respect his space while holding on to the faint hope that there might still be something left to salvage. When he asked to meet that day, I felt a mixture of relief and dread. Relief because I'd been waiting for this moment, desperate to know where we stood. Dread because I wasn't sure I could handle the finality of his decision if it wasn't what I hoped for. We met at the park near our old neighborhood, a place we had once brought the kids for picnics and lazy Sunday afternoons. Ryan arrived first, sitting on a bench with his hands clasped together, his expression calm but unreadable. I sat down beside him, leaving a small space between us, and waited for him to speak. "Thanks for coming," he said quietly, his eyes fixed on the ground. I nodded, my voice too shaky to respond. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he continued, his tone steady but tinged with sadness. "About us, about everything that's happened. And I think it's time we figure out where we go from here." I swallowed hard, my heart pounding in my chest. "Ryan, I know I've hurt you," I said softly. "And I don't expect you to forgive me easily, or maybe even at all. But I love you, and I want to make this right. I'll do whatever it takes." He turned to look at me then, his eyes searching mine. "Do you really mean that, Eileen?" he asked. "Because love alone doesn't fix this. It doesn't undo what happened. And it doesn't change the fact that I can't look at you without wondering if I'll ever feel the same way about you again." His words were like a punch to the gut, but I forced myself to hold his gaze. "I know it's not enough," I said, my voice trembling. "But I'm willing to fight for us, Ryan. I'll go to therapy, counseling, whatever it takes to rebuild what I've broken. I just need to know if you're willing to try." He sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair. "That's the thing, Eileen," he said. "I don't know if I can. I've been trying to figure out if there's a part of me that can move past this, that can trust you again. And some days, I think maybe I can. But other days..." His voice trailed off, and he shook his head. "Other days I feel like I'm fooling myself." Tears streamed down my face, but I didn't wipe them away. "Ryan, please," I whispered. "Don't give up on us. We've been through so much together. I know I messed up, but I want to make it better. I want to be better. For you, for the kids, for us." He was silent for a long moment, his expression conflicted. "I don't want to make any promises I can't keep," he said finally. "But I'm willing to take it one step at a time. Counseling, talking, figuring out if there's something worth saving. But if I don't see real change, Eileen, I can't stay in a marriage that makes me feel like I'm always waiting for the other shoe to drop." Relief and fear flooded me simultaneously. He wasn't giving up, but he wasn't ready to forgive me completely either. "That's all I ask," I said quickly, my voice breaking. "One step at a time. I'll do the work, Ryan. I swear I will." He nodded slowly, standing up and offering me a hand. "We'll see," he said, his tone cautious, but not unkind. As I took his hand, I felt the weight of his words settle over me. This wasn't a promise of reconciliation or a guarantee of happily ever after. It was a fragile chance, a sliver of hope that we might be able to rebuild what I had broken. Betrayal in a relationship cuts deep, leaving wounds that may never fully heal. Love, while powerful, is not always enough to repair the damage. Rebuilding trust requires effort, patience, and an unrelenting commitment from both sides. Even then, the outcome is never certain. True strength lies in confronting the pain, owning one's mistakes, and taking the first step toward healing, no matter how uncertain the path may be.